Please give a warm welcome to writer-director Azazel Jacobs.
Hello.
So glad you're here, Aza. When I introduced the film, I told them that the rhythm, the musicality, I was really struck with the words, the sound of the words in your script. And is that something that you were conscious when
So thank you for having me. Thank you for all being here so much. That is exactly what got me writing. The way that I usually write is I walk through with a little notepad, just writing random ideas and thoughts and experiences. But it wasn't until that I started realizing that these kind of very disparate notes were different people in this same situation under this one household. But I heard that rhythm that you're talking about, and that's what brought it together and got me sitting down writing, just trying to chase down that specific thing, just starting with Katie's speech and just trying to go. I've always written about characters that hold things in, and to have a character that was just like starting off like a train and just like unloading everything was exciting for me. But it was more than anything chasing a certain cadence and rhythm of voice, which led me to these actors, but also just chasing a rhythm that happens in terms of time when you know someone is gonna pass and how that affects time.
The opening is remarkable because it's so abrupt, and it made me think about you and I had a brief conversation. I told you, my dad had a long period of dementia and ultimate death, and that situation is just it's a surreal experience. And the way you started the film put me right into that frame of mind of my having to deal with my dad's death, where it comes out of nowhere. Can you tell us about that abrupt beginning?
That's you said it best for me. This was a thing that I'm very close with my parents. They've been friends and inspirations, and besides just parents to me. And so like the fear of losing them started early for me once I realized that this is what happens in life. But in terms of like this situation, what felt very far away and then suddenly it was like right here, in just terms of my own personal experience. And that felt this kind of just jumping in the middle, no opening credits, felt like the closest to replicate what it's felt to me as well, which is just like, I'm just in it. It seemed far away, and now I'm just deep into it. And starting off in that way really helped me kind of just give me the momentum to just kind of stay and follow these actors. And it continued in the way that we shot too, because we shot this film in order. So that's scene one, that's shot one, that's Carrie Coon just kind of going in there and just doing it. And it had a effect. Just that opening shot had such a big effect that carried on through the entire shoot.
Huge admirer of you, but I was blown away cinematically what you accomplished in this film, which leads to my question about it. You reveal characters as the movie unfolds, but this apartment becomes a fourth character. And the way you cinematically slowly reveal the apartment, tell us about that dynamic.
I'm so glad you saw that. That was essential. So Sam Levy is the first time I'm working with a cinematographer. Sam Levy, a fan of his, Wendy and Lucy and Lady Bird, and so many other beautiful. And I loved his eye, and I loved how specific his eye could be, and his use of colors and lights. It was very important to me that I shot this on an actual location in an apartment to deal with what natural light would do, having walls that couldn't move. Like those limitations were something that were very important for me telling this story. But knowing that we weren't going to be able to shift lights and move walls or do anything or hang things high meant, how do we deal with this place in the same way that we are dealing with these sisters? So that as the sisters are, they present themselves a certain way, and there's like a very rigidness to the opening shots that as their seams start kind of revealing themselves and this kind of characters that they're presenting themselves to each other starts to, disappearing, that we'd also start getting an understanding of how this layout of this apartment works, that we really wouldn't understand fully how things, even though it's a tight quarters, we wouldn't see how the living room was connected to the kitchen, and we'd kind of focus on these slices just enough to get really an idea of who these people are in terms of who the father is, even putting Carrie Coon behind a white wall so that we'd really just kind of tease out this information, knowing that we'd be in here for the most of the time.
Some of my students are in here and listening, and I always tell them that content and the way the film is put together are intricately tied. And I was just blown away by the fact that you tell us how these characters deal with each other, the way we navigate the apartment and the discoveries. Was that something that was always?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those ones which came out of a real urgency for me. I really had to tell this story. I had a window to tell the story before caretaking was going to not allow me to be able to be involved in the way that film calls for you to be involved in it, making a film. So all those things had to be very, very specific, like down to just the production, how I was putting together production, how I was putting together the producers, the financing. All that stuff was as essential as just kind of understanding what the layout and how to communicate this thing that in some ways I really needed to, like, I wanted to work with Sam for a bunch of reasons, but also it forced a language. It made me like say things that I wanted to articulate. On the other side, like, I knew that I didn't want to work with my editor that I love and I usually work with, because I felt like I couldn't actually communicate what the timing, the rhythm that I was chasing after, that I'd need to be in the edit room by myself to kind of pursue this specific thing. But working with, like, just going back to Sam, it's the first time that I've ever done a paper edit beforehand, and it was more than anything just so that we understood, yes, we're shooting on film, but we also know that we know whose scene it is before we're going into it, that there's not going to be coverage in the regular way, that this wasn't going to be decided later on, that everything, we're going to make a commitment and stick to that beforehand. And I could know, like, with a paper edit, I could understand, okay, that's how many cuts I would need to kind of get this, let's say, back and forth or whatever the thing that I was chasing at that particular moment was. Mm-hmm. And this was something that I really opened up to the actors, to the three leads especially, just so that they really understood there's no coverage in the traditional way that we're usually used to, that this is going to be all decided beforehand.
When you mean paper edit, it's like you had storyboarded everything?
Not storyboarded. I wound up doing a color-coded version of the script, so like I could color code each of the angles of the sisters and then get an idea just by seeing it. So it was more like a musical score than anything. Like that was the idea. So I could see the rhythms of the cuts. So even if I didn't, like, it's not something I brought into the edit room, but it was something that gave me the idea of, like, okay, ba 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 to this shot, and then, like, I could feel it much more like notes than anything.
Wow. The reason why I bring up storyboarding is because the film is beautifully composed, framing. I'm thinking in particular the scene where Carrie confronts Natasha in the bathroom about her smoking, and how the framing, the door, it tells us so much about their relationship. Was that something that you were?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we were very aware of it. It also is something that gets forced when you're in. I mean, one of the things shooting in order does is it really allows you to track where you're coming from and what you've done and how you've covered a scene. So even if we're in the same room, we already know what angles have been revealed so far, rather than like you're usually guessing like, okay, this is scene 4, but we have already shot scene 20 or whatever it is. In this case, we really had something to build on and go, okay, we already did this version. How do we evolve this into something else? How do we reveal something more? So a lot of it was a conversation. It was great to get into the apartment with Sam really early on. It was a young couple that lived there, so it was sparsely dressed, but they hadn't had a chance. Usually that thin, beautiful wall that's in there gets torn down. It's like the first thing that people would do in that complex, but they hadn't yet been able to do that. They had just kind of moved in, so there was just a kind of weird, strange, thin cement wall that we wound up really embracing. So the bones of the place were very much still left from the 40s and 50s, and we kind of got it before it was going to get more, modernized and utilized and talk about. Okay, so we're in there quite a bit, just figuring out, okay, this is interesting, But also Sam's 6'5", 6'6", and there's just certain things that would be forced because he was behind the camera, and like that angle that you're talking about, like it was such a tight wedge. That truly was the most that you could possibly get. And it was like, how do we utilize that? I mean, and so many of the films, like filmmakers that I love, Kaurismäki, like you get the sense of the whole world by how precise and how tight the frames are. That's always been something that I've been like super inspired by, rather than the idea of just coverage.
I'm gonna go out on the limb, shut me down. When I was watching your film, I kept thinking about 2001: Space Odyssey. The scene, bear with me, the scene with the red light, when Carrie first comes out of the room seeing her dad, tell me about that red light, which alluded to me to kind of like sci-fi.
Can I just say how impressed I am with what you're like?
Oh, well,
It did
I'm
not have
relieved
this-
because I
Yeah.
literally went on the limb going like, you're
No,
just gonna laugh.
this hasn't come up before, but that was the thing that I said to Sam, which is like, I want this room to be science fiction. I want this to feel like another planet. I want this to feel something else, because that's how it's felt to me. I wanted to exaggerate this red light. I wanted to exaggerate what was coming over there, because it's full of machines and there's a human being there, and it's like a planet that we were not going to go to, that we don't fully understand, that we have a sense of what's going on there, and that it was okay to exaggerate it with that specific light. So that it's like even that that the yellow light that's flashing over there among the heart monitor is not something that comes with those heart monitors, but I really wanted this metronome, and I wanted this sense of this light. So that's like a full rig from the lighting equipment, just to kind of build out this flashing light that was happening on a metronome, so that I could get a sense of like, oh, there's a human being there, regardless of the fact that we never see a slice of him, through the corner frame of the bed or anything like that.
Which leads me to the next question, which is time compression. I don't recall seeing a film where time you play with time so magnificently. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I don't understand what happens at time when you know that someone's going and that you're all gathering, and that suddenly you're stepping out of your life, your email life and your phone calls and all responsibilities, and none of that really matters at all. Like, it just suddenly doesn't matter, and then you're very, very present. And then you're going through these stages, or at least I've gone through these stages of going like, I don't believe this is happening, I believe this is happening, and waiting for this thing to happen. And so I found the oddest experience in terms of just like, I'm thinking of one thing and it feels like it takes hours, like you're gonna make a coffee and it takes 5 hours, and then suddenly the coffee's in your hand and you don't know what happened in between. So I think one of the things that I aimed for is to do a film without transition any transitional moments, no like people opening doors to get onto the other sides. We're really just, there's so many jumps in that, in the film, so that the sense of continuity is much truer to like the emotional experience rather than the you know, trying to give a physical layout and go, okay, this person enters this room, they go over there. So there's like lots of just bits and especially the first act is really just of moments and moments and moments until we start seeing that, okay, these are actually revealing something and they're starting to connect, and then we start sharing frames, and then sisters start sharing frames with each other so that we can start seeing, okay, we're settling into a different groove as they start settling into a different relationship with each other.
But at the same time, it's such an ambitious arc. It's only 3 days, and so much happens, and this sort of journey that, you know, when we first meet the sisters, we've watched them evolve so much and go through so much. Is that something that it was always your goal, this very ambitious arc?
It was. I mean, out of anything I've ever done, this is the most intentional in terms of like, oh, what is there represents what I was chasing after, very specific, and I was able to be very specific in a way that I usually I'm not aiming to or didn't, but in this case, I've needed this film as refuge from the real life thing. So the real life thing has been something completely out of control, and the film is something that at least I can aim to control, and with this one, have as much control as possible. I would say, though, shooting in order, shooting 17 days meant like that we wrapped out a scene. We just wrapped out entire scenes every day, so it had an effect that only smaller films, they can only do that, take advantage of.
Okay.
So the fact that we're not moving locations, there's no reason, you know, we're not losing time changing locations. We're just constantly in production, constantly shooting. Actors are not going away. They're just staying up there because we're gonna go on to the next scene. The only scene that got split into 2 days is the father scene, because that was such a big, you know, thing to figure out and give us time as a new actor. And but other than that, we're wrapping scene by scene by scene, so that when we do get to the end, yes, I could say that I was very specific. I knew the 3 of them were gonna sit on the couch together. I knew that Christina would be in the middle. After that, what they do and how they lay on each other and how they are with each other, I think could have only happened by us going through the process together and getting as close, and the fact that they got on the way that they did and the crew really got on board and got connected, because we're all cramped in a 3-bedroom apartment for the most part.
And how much input did the actresses have did the script get altered by their input?
No, I mean, so you should know that I wrote it with them in mind, and Giovanna Depo. They were the first ones I sent it. I sent it simultaneously to them. I printed out hard copies. I wanted them to know that this was gonna exist outside of how films usually happen, that it was gonna be shot on film, it was gonna be shot on location, it was gonna be shot as much in order as possible, that I'd have Final Cut, that it would be ours, that we would be a team, and that everything else would kind of come in place if they responded. So they responded to the script, and that was a really nice jumping off place, that we were all in agreement that that this is what it's gonna be, because I really needed it to be this. I didn't need to go off in other directions. I wanted this specific thing. But in terms of the other things that these actors bring, it's like me. That's why I went to them, because the way that they look each other, the way that they hold it themselves, you know, the things that they do with their hands and the breathing and the eye, like everything is like, that's why I went to these kind of incredible actors, because it's to breathe true life into it, and something that's challenging, because it's like I'm a page-and-a-half monologue from the beginning. It's like very theatrical in this way that I'm trying to balance off the theatrics of life versus, and the theatrics of what the magic of cinema versus trying to capture something realistic and true and being on location. And dealing with the elements.
You brought up the father earlier. I was watching the film, and then all of a sudden, the dream sequence of the father happened, and I was like, wow, I didn't know there was a necessity to that scene. Can you tell us about the genesis of having
It worried me. It's one of the, so like this is not a script that I wrote that I plotted out. Oh, okay, act 1, act 2, act 3. I definitely had specific things that scenes and this thing with the apples. I'd have these notes to myself of things that I was kind of aiming towards, and I obviously knew how it was going to end in terms of the father's life. But writing it was very much writing page 1, going in order, and then suddenly they went into that room, and I knew I didn't want to go into that room. Like, that was the one rule that I had for myself, which was like, did not want to do a dying scene, did not feel like I could depict it truthfully. It's not something that I felt I could do well or that I was interested in doing. But then when I was writing, suddenly they're walking out with their dad, and it totally worried me. It's just like, oh no, this is not what I had such a clean, simple story, that I aimed for. And then it was breaking this rule, and then that was interesting to me, that it was breaking a rule, because it's like, I like films that do that. But then ultimately I was like, okay, I want to hear what this father has to say. And then what the father says, I needed. Like, I truly just needed it as a person. Just wanted to hear and live this kind of, this fantasy that may be his fantasy, or maybe it's their fantasy, but for us, it's real. Like, we get to live in it long enough, just long enough that we let go of going like, oh, is this real or not? Because we just wind up staying in it just hopefully long enough that you just kind of start getting a sense of who this person is, and having this chance to say, I love you and I'm sorry, and here's something that's very fundamental and important to me. That seemed essential, at least for me, to feel the weight of him gone.
The reason that to me felt so essential was different because, in the title of the film, you call it his 3 daughters. And so from the get-go, I'm sorry I'm a little too literal at times. The point of view for me when I started watching the film is like, oh, I'm seeing it from the point of view of the father. And also the point of view of the filmmaker, the fact that it could have been 3 daughters, but instead you make it his 3 daughters. And then all of a sudden here comes the father's point of view, or the filmmaker's point of view comes in as well in that moment, and it's breathtaking.
Well, it's also like the answer. The title is the answer, right? The thing that they're fighting. This is the 3 daughters. This is what this is ultimately about. It's simple that these are his 3 daughters, and the conflict is that they don't necessarily see each other in that way, and that, like it just I like it's the first. We have no opening credits. We don't see that, so it really is like the answer in a lot of ways. We come into it knowing that it's coming from this perspective, and at least it's the way that so much of the way that they're seeing each other is through other eyes that they're imagining, right? Yeah. And so that's always over there. And even during the fantasy, the father says, I heard this thing. So there's this idea that the father is really present throughout this whole story, hearing everything that's going on. But it was a way for me to acknowledge that they're either seeing each other through imagining eyes of their father, or they're fighting this one very just truthful statement, and also address the fact that, like, I'm not trying to write from the point of view of the sisters, even though I find myself in each of these sisters. Like, I'm understanding that I'm an outside, I'm a man writing this thing, and I felt like this was a way to reflect that as well.
So much to ask you. Everything you say, I have like 3 questions that could develop from it. First is the father, when you present him, you could have rolled him out with an IV and sickly and coughing, but instead, I'm curious about the choice.
It was a scary choice. Like, it wasn't, I would say that it wasn't one that I didn't like. I just tried to go on my instinct. And so when I sat down with, like, I wrote for these, for the three sisters and for Giovanna Depo, who plays Benji. All the other roles were through sitting down and castings. And when I sat down with J.O. Sanders, it was like, oh, whatever it is that I'm searching for, this is it. Like, it was very, very clear. He showed up. We were deep into the shoot by that point. We were at the very end since we were shooting in order. It truly was an intrusion to have, like, we had such a specific rhythm working, and suddenly there was this father there, there's this man there, and it completely changes dynamics of the crew, just in terms of having another actor, changes the of the actors, but also the dynamics of the sister. That conversation about makeup and like how far we want to go with this thing, it's like I wanted, it's not something I felt, I just felt comfortable with, like asking for somebody to act dying and to be painted in that way and to be kind of, there's something that felt so, one of the big reasons that this film, for me, that I needed to do this and do that, and deal with death in this way, is that when I went through, like when I first lost somebody when 19 years old, my first response was like, oh, wow, the films lied to me about this. Like, this is completely not how movies set me up to feel, right? There's no music, there's no slow motion, there's no way to go back to it. It just was abrupt, and I felt very cheated, like, with this idea that there was something romantic in this way or anything like that. And so this was a way for me to acknowledge, like, the limitations and embrace the kind of incredible things that film can do. So you can feel the absence, but not necessarily go through the trying to force you to believe that this is exactly how he looks, Like, we always have this sense with this film, I believe, of the theatricalness of it all.
I want to ask you about the importance of the Bliss story that the father tells us. I mentioned that it reminded me of the end of The Lovers when Tracy Letts, guys, if you haven't seen The Lovers, you have to do yourself a favor and see his film with Tracy Letts, Carrie Coon's husband. He sings in The Lovers, and I saw a connection between the Bliss story and when Tracy Letts sings in The Lovers at the end. Can you tell us about the importance of that moment?
Well, I could say that the scene that he's talking about in The Lovers, that Tracy Letts sings, and that was something that was very specific, that I remember being maybe 20 years old and being at someone's house, and that moment happened where somebody just got on the piano and played that, and it stuck with me, so that here I was 20-something years later, and it was still there, and it wound up emerging. Bliss is somebody that I cared for, whose life was very affected by, who I lost many, many years ago, and just I think about all the time. And so it was one of those, again, moments that a person that I'm just carrying around in the way that at that moment that I was just trying to figure out a way to express these feelings about.
Tell us about your costume designer, Diaz Jacobs. I have never been so enthralled watching the character development and who these people are by watching the specificity of the costumes. Carrie's wearing this very professional look with the turtlenecks. Natasha is wearing non-gender sports clothing. And then you have Lizzie Olsen wearing old bands, T-shirts, and like the moment they walk into the room, I know so much about who they are by the clothing.
Yeah. So Diaz has been my collaborator and partner, and partner in life, and for just about 24 years now. And so we work. She's there every single stage for me. So from first draft to color correction, she's just there, and she's the eyes that I trust above all other eyes. And so the conversation, and she also does, besides being a producer and a filmmaker in her own right, she's also been doing costumes on the films that I've made for many years. And so what that's meant is that the conversation about the clothes start almost at the very first draft that she's read, and it allows me to start figuring out what world this exists, like how this connects to our world and how this doesn't. A lot of my films I would like describe as like a foot off the ground, you know, and so like we're able to take advantage of that. Okay, we can, you know, like this shirt that that Rachel wears with the puppy eyes, like that's, you know, so it's so specific that like we're getting to see something that Rachel won't show to her sisters, but it's right there on her shirt. Or like or searching for that Grateful Dead shirt, which was like a specific, like it has to fit in a certain year that's right. It has to kind of say something about who she was in the past, and at the same time we have to believe like how this could still work with the person that she is now. I think a lot about the corduroy pants that she's wearing in that opening scene on the phone, and like so there's a way, if anything, like having that conversation about the clothes so early truly helps me with the actors, because by the time I'm talking to the actors, I can talk to them about the world in a much fuller way than usual, because we've had this idea of like how the wardrobe's going to work and how those colors are going to work. And so Sam and Diaz and I worked very, very close in terms of just like using the colors to then inform the production design, inform the film stock that we'd use, so that everything would kind of either, you know, be in communication or in clash with each other.
Was the song that Liz sings to the sisters and consoles them was always in the script?
Yeah, it was always in the script, but it wasn't a song that I was familiar with. It was like, I knew that I wanted her to go back to something that would comfort her daughter, and that this like thing that she's being criticized about would suddenly be like a super strength, which is like she has this inside of her and she knows how to give it to not only her, you know, 3-year-old daughter, but to give to her sisters, and that it would serve a similar purpose. But then I just went searching for, you know, nursery rhymes, and they're all so depressing and sad. If you look at them through that prism, they're all heartbreaking. So it wasn't hard to pick one, but this one seemed particularly apt.
And did the staging, this triangle that you built with the 3 of them, did it happen organically, or is something that you...
Both. Both. I mean, Lizzie has been saying, because we've been doing, you know, we've been talking specific, like, if we hadn't shot in order, if that was day 1 or day 2, she would never have touched, like, Natasha's hair in that way. She wouldn't have brushed her, like, there's just certain things that she wouldn't have done. And Carrie, I don't know how Carrie would have been in terms of leaning on Lizzie, like, creating this tower. So I could have been, like, I definitely knew that in the script, it's like Christina's in the middle. I knew that Rachel would be like in her lap, and I had an idea of the configuration. How it all works together truly is like them figuring out how to make it real, you know?
And then, obvious question, but the importance of having 3 daughters, the 3 points of view. Can you tell us about your take on it?
I mean, one thing, it's just such a shorthand to figure out conflict, because it's just like we have 2 people on opposite sides, and we know that they're there. They kind of lay out exactly who they are and what their issues are with each other and themselves and who they are in the first few minutes. And that was a great just dynamic to have in terms of writing, because suddenly I always had 3 different spots to go to, and 3 very, very different spots. So I think there's that was just like, it's just a narrative construct was really helpful. And then just the feeling that as I've gone through this experience, I've found myself shape-shifting through all these roles, sometimes within the hour, you know? So when I was walking around New York just writing random notes, it was like, got to get this DNR together. I got to do this. I don't want to do this. I want to do it go away. I just want to step away, or whatever it was. And finding myself as a Katie, as a Rachel, as a Christina, and obviously as Benji and all the other roles was something like that allowed me to separate these different feelings I was going through in persons.
Well, it's been an amazing joy to talk to you. Thank you.
Ew, this is so nice. I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you,
Everyone,
everybody.
thank you.
Spread the word. It's
Yes.
on Netflix.
Wow, that was